Welcome again to the session. In this session, as you can see, the topic is how to supercharge your literature review with AI tools. Now, more specifically, what we'll discuss is that initially we'll start with more of background to literature reviews to understand what exactly is a literature review so that we all are on the same page when we are going forward in this webinar. Then I'll talk about my own experience, how I conducted literature reviews as a PhD student. Initially, when I did literature reviews, how I did it. So that was the more traditional way. There was no use of AI. Now, after that, I'll talk about that how we can do the same kind of literature reviews, but with the help of AI tools, meaning that we can do it more efficiently, we can do it more effectively. And the fourth thing we'll discuss is that what in my understanding is the future of research and how researchers will do research in future. So we'll talk about more of the sort of the trends and the modern approaches to doing research. And lastly, about in that kind of scenario, when the methods that we follow to do research, when they are changing, what sort of skills we need as researchers to adopt to those changes. So starting with myself as a PhD student back in when I started in 2017. So I started with literature reviews. So you can see like on my profile, I picked some of the literature reviews that I did, and all of them being published in quite good venues. Like for example, either they are like A or A star rank conference, sorry, journals. So the reason I'm showing this is to sort of give you an idea that as a PhD student, I did multiple literature reviews, and even as a postdoc, also I did literature reviews. And now as an assistant professor, although I don't do it like as a first author, but I certainly guide and supervise students to literature reviews. So I want to share with you first my experience back then, that how exactly I did it. And then we'll make a comparison that if I do it today, how I will do it differently. So generally, doing a good literature review, a literature review that is of the quality of being published in a very good journal, it takes around 4 to 6 months, and even more. Yes, with time, like for example, the first of my literature review, it took around 4 months, maybe the next one took 3 months, the next one took 2 months. But on average, it takes around 4 to 6 months to do a high quality literature review. Now, this is what I'm talking about is when you're doing it in a very traditional way. You're not using any AI tools, you're not using any more modern smart methods. So the point here is that it does take a lot of time to do a solid literature review. Now, what exactly is a literature review, just to be on the same page? So, as the name itself says that literature review means you take the existing literature on a topic and you study that literature and then identify some patterns, some kind of trends, identify, okay, what future research can be done based on existing research, what gaps are there. So, for example, if I want to do a literature review, let's suppose on the topic of um, uh, let's suppose the role of AI in healthcare, right? So what I'll do is that I will run some queries on some platforms like let's suppose on Google Scholar or on SciSpace or on any other platform through which I want to identify papers. And through that, I will collect some papers. Let's suppose I collected around 100 papers, and then I will study those 100 papers to determine that what are the trends, the patterns in this field of study, what are the gaps, and how those gaps can be filled in future. So this is the if you look at the flow of or the steps of how things work. So you identify research studies, then you compile them, you summarize the findings, you analyze the contributions, you identify gaps, you highlight inconsistencies, and you set foundation for future research. This is what is a literature review. In very simple words, you have a topic, and then you go identify papers on that topic, and then you study those papers, and that is what is called a literature review. Now, when we talk about literature review, could be multiple types of literature review. Some more prominent types, or what you see on your screen. So the first one is a systematic literature review. So in a systematic literature review, it follows a very rigorous methodology. So you need to do the data collection in the very right way. You need to analyze the data in the right way. You need to report the data in the very right way. It is very systematic. There are already defined guidelines. Like in my field, coming from the computers background, there is guideline written by Barbara Katchinam, and when we do systematic literature review, we follow that guideline step by step to make sure that we do the literature review according to that guideline. And when we submit the paper to a journal for publication, the reviewers also look at our paper and review our paper as per those guidelines, that whether it is following it religiously or it is not following that guideline. The second one is what is called a scoping review. So in this one, you sort of more look for identifying the main concepts, the data sources, type of evidence, those kind of things. So you do not follow that much of a rigorous methodology. Rather, you look for understanding the field through a scoping review. The third one is integrative review. Now, in this one, we analyze the literature in a critical way. And what I mean by critical way is that, let's suppose I have identified 100 papers for my literature review. So what I'll do is that I'll identify then the strengths and weaknesses of each of those papers. For example, I pick paper 1 and I say that the strength of this study is that they have, let's suppose, used 10 different AI models to detect cancer, right? That is a strength. And the weaknesses could be that they have only evaluated their AI models with one data set. So the findings that they have, those are not generalizable. So that's a weakness of the study. So in an integrative review, what we do is that we identify the strength and weakness of each paper that we have identified. Then the fourth one is what is called narrative review. So in this one, we look to the literature to identify patterns, trends, and gaps. Now, what I mean by patterns and trends. So, if we take the same example of, let's suppose, using AI to detect cancer, so the patterns could be that, for example, a particular algorithm is used, let's suppose, by 50 papers. So, this is a more common pattern to use this particular algorithm for detecting cancer. That algorithm could be anything. Like, for example, they use, let's suppose, convolutional neural networks to identify or to detect, diagnose cancer. So we look for that kind of patterns in the literature through narrative review. The fifth one is what is called historical review. So in a historical review, we look at the topic from evolution perspective, that how the topic has evolved. So if we take the same example of using AI for detecting cancer, so for example, we can see that okay, in from 2000 to 2010, people were let's suppose relying on images to detect cancer, X-rays. Then from 2010 to 2020, they were relying more on, for example, some kind of ECG data or some kind of textual data or some kind of numerical data to detect cancer. So we look at it that how the topic has evolved over the years. And then number 6 is what is called meta synthesis. So in this one, we are more interested in qualitative studies. So for example, qualitative study could be collecting data, let's suppose, through interviews, through questionnaires, through observations, through workshops, that kind of data, like for example, textual data. We look, we interpret, and we identify codes and themes in the data. So the reason I am showing you these types of literature review, the types of literature reviews, is to before you start your literature review, you need to identify and determine what kind of literature review you want to do. Like in my case, what I did was that majority of my literature reviews were systematic literature reviews because they are very much grounded in methodology, but in the findings are very reliable because you have taken every single correct step to produce those findings. But the problem with systematic literature review, for example, is that it takes a lot of time as compared to maybe a scoping review. So before you start your literature review, determine what type of literature review you want to do. Now, the next um, part is that okay, we know what is literature review. We have determined that what type of literature review you want to conduct. The next step is that what would be the steps to do this literature review. So the first thing is the need for review. Why you want to do a review? This is again an important question that you need to answer. For example, sometimes, like as a PhD student, literature review is the requirement for your thesis. Then, for let's suppose when I did a literature review during my postdoc, the purpose was to identify a research gap. So the and then like for example in industry, people do a literature review only for the purpose of understanding a field of study. So it is important that you determine why you want to do a literature review at the first place, because the goal would then direct you to go in that direction. Then the next part is defining research questions. What exactly you want to answer through your literature review. Then the next one is conducting a pilot study. Now this one is important. Pilot study is like, for example, if I have to, all in all, let's suppose I have 100 papers for literature review, but doing studying all that 100 papers and ending up with a wrong literature review could be very risky. So what we do is that in a pilot study, we only pick, let's suppose, around 10 papers from that. We study and then we reach to the conclusions and see that whether it is taking us in the right direction or not. So it's more like kind of you're reducing the risk of going wrong in your literature review. The fourth step would be you design a search string through which you're gonna execute that search string on some engine and then you retrieve papers. Then the next one would be inclusion and exclusion criteria, what papers you are going to include and what papers you are going to exclude from your research, from your literature review. Then selecting relevant studies, then extracting data from those studies, and finally analyzing the extracted data and reporting the data in the form of a research paper. So we'll go into these steps, that how I did it manually, and if I have to do it today, how I will do it in a more automated and efficient manner. So I'm taking as an example one of my literature reviews, and I'll show you that how I did execute each of the steps I showed in the previous slide. And then it will sort of give us a very good comparative analysis that this is how I did it. And if I do it today, what I will do. So this is one of the paper, architectural tactics for big data cybersecurity analytics. It was published back then in the Journal of Systems and Software, which is one of the best journals as far as software engineering studies are concerned. So I had these two questions defined for my literature review. How I defined these questions, I initially studied some papers, like 4 or 5 papers, to understand the field. And then obviously I had discussions with my PhD supervisor that, okay, what would be the best questions to answer through this literature review. So I have the questions and then I have the motivation for each of the questions. Then comes the part about, okay, I have the questions, now I need to identify papers to answer those questions. So for that one, I have to design this kind of a string, a search string. Okay, and then once I designed the search string, then I had these databases through which I executed. So IEEE Explore, Scopus, Science Direct, ACM, and so on and so forth. These are the ones which are relevant in my research area, but then there could be other digital databases. Like for example, you can see that for medical databases, PubMed is very popular. Then you can also, Google Scholar is one of the more popular search engine. So this is what you can determine based on your field of study. Then the next part I did was that I defined a criteria that what I will include, which papers I'll include, and which papers I will not include in my research, in my literature review. So this is the criteria that will guide you to include or exclude papers. Because what is going to happen is that when you run this search query, it is going to return a lot of papers, maybe 5,000 papers. You can't study 5,000 papers for your literature review; it will take you ages. So you need to reduce it to the minimal but relevant papers for your literature review. How you're going to do that? How you're going to filter out those papers through this inclusion and exclusion criteria. Okay, now if you look at this one, so this is the case for my literature review. So when I run the search query on these search engines, it all in all return around 4,600 papers. Now, as I mentioned that I couldn't study that kind of papers. I was doing PhD. I only had limited 4 or 5 months time to do literature review and then move towards primary research. So I initially did title based selection. So without reading anything about the paper, I only had to look at the title. And based on that, I determined whether it's relevant to my literature review or not. When I did title based selection, it reduced it to 748 papers. And then there were many duplicates. The reason was that some of the search engines, you might retrieve the same paper from multiple engines. So then I removed the duplicate papers. After that, I did abstract based selection. So I read the abstract of the paper and I had my inclusion criteria in front of me. Reading the abstract, I could determine whether this paper is relevant or this paper is not relevant. So this reduced the number of papers to 168. Then I had to read the full text of these 168 papers and having my inclusion and exclusion criteria in front of me, and based on that, it reduced it to 69 papers. And then I did snowballing, and that further added 5 papers. So what is snowballing is that I took these 69 papers and I went through the references of these papers to see that if there is any paper that I have missed. And then through that, I identified 5 more papers relevant to my literature review, and I ended up with having 74 papers for my literature review. So this is how I selected papers for my literature review using systematic literature review methodology. Now, once I identified these 74 papers, then I had to determine that what kind of data I'm going to extract from those papers, right? So for that one, I had to design this data extraction form. So this is D1, D2 data item 1, data item 2, and so on and so forth. And then I had to write that each of this data, which research question it's going to answer. So some of these were like demographic data, and then these were Q1, Q2, and so on. Then if I look at the timeline of this literature review, so we started in 2018, then we submitted it in May 2018, then revised January 2019, and then the paper was accepted in January of 2019. So you see that it takes around, I don't know, around 8 months, even in the publication process. So all in all, if we count it from January 2018 to January 2019, it almost took a year. So the first 4 months were 4 to 5 months were in doing the literature review, and then the next 7-8 months it took to have it published. Now, I until this far, what I showed you is that um, how I did literature review through a manual process. Everything was manual. Gave research questions, identification of papers, data extraction from papers, analysis of data, reporting, and so on and so forth. Everything was manual, right? Now, in some cases, you might not have that much time. Like, for example, I had around 4 or 5 months of time, but I believe that now research is really, really fast. And with the modern tools, we can do the same with less than half of the time what it took need to do a literature review. So that is what we are going to look at, that if I have to do the literature review today, what is it that I will do different? So the first one is about identification of papers. So if you can recall, what I showed you is that I had to design a search string. I have to run the search string through 5 6 different databases, then do that retrieved around 4,600 papers. Then do title based selection, then abstract, then full text, and then snowballing, and so on and so forth. But with modern tools, you don't need to do all of this. You can identify the relevant papers through these tools. So the first thing is that we look at that how we can use SciSpace to identify relevant papers for your literature review. So let's have a look at this demo. So let's suppose my topic is what is the impact of AI on education. This is my topic for my literature review. So what I'm going to do is that I will write the topic, then I'll hit enter. Then it will ask me a question like what kind of education. So I just specified that I'm more interested in higher education. And what you can see is that it has identified 921 relevant papers. Here you can see the title of the paper. Then you can either chat with the paper, you can listen to the paper, you can request the PDF of the paper. And within that, one thing you can do is that you can be more specific. For example, if you think that 921 papers are certainly too many to be included in a literature review, you can be more specific in your query. For example, you can say that I'm interested only in papers that are published in the last 10 years. I'm interested in papers that are only published in Q1 journals. I'm interested in papers that are open access. So when you include those kind of filters in your query, it will definitely reduce the number. Moreover, if you see here, you can also have some filters over here. The same, like for example, sometimes when we do literature review, we do not want to include conference papers. We only want to include journals. Then sometimes we are focused only on high quality papers. So you can have a filter that only Q1 or Q2 journal papers. So that would automatically help you to get the right number and the right set of papers for your literature review. Now, one of the problem that we have seen is that we manually, what we do is that when we used to identify a paper, let's suppose from Google Scholar, then we would see that whether I can have access to the PDF or not. Now sometimes, like for example, if your university offers access to those digital databases like IEEE Explore, ACM, and so on and so forth, then that's all good. But sometimes students do not have access to those databases. In that case, you need to determine whether you can have, like for example, okay, a paper is relevant, but do you have, can you access its PDF or not? So for that one, we have this amazing feature which you can use to immediately see that whether you can access the PDF of that paper or you cannot access the PDF. So let's have a look how this works. We go to the library, and let's suppose there is this paper, and here you can see this button, what is called get PDF. So you click on it, you can, it says download from a library, request PDF from authors. So if it's open access, for example, if it's available for free on a particular library, you can have it downloaded. If that's not the case, in that case, you can also you see that it says that SciSpace will email authors on your behalf. So majority of the times, like for example, in my case, if I've asked authors for a PDF, or if I've even asked them for a question related to their work, they most often they are very much willing to help. You can enter the institution name and then see that whether the paper is available or not available. So in this case, it's not available, but when it is available, it will show you and you can immediately download the paper. Now, once you have identified the papers through this way, then the next part was about the data extraction. So if you can recall, what I showed is that in my case, when I did it more traditionally, I had the data extraction form and then I had to manually extract each data item from the paper. But with SciSpace, you can automate that process. And for me personally, this is one of the most personally my favorite feature in SciSpace, that you can extract relevant data from the papers within the blink of an eye. So let's have a look how it works. So I said find papers on cancer. So it has identified the list of papers that, okay, these are the 120 papers that are relevant to your search query, right? So it says that, for example, how relevant that paper is it like, 100 by 100, 100 by 100, and so on and so forth, right? It also has these states like high relevant, or moderately relevant. Then is the abstract of the paper. And here you see that on the right side, you have these columns, right? So insights, conclusions, summarized, abstract result, and so on and so forth. So you can, as you click on a particular part, that part SciSpace will automatically extract from the paper and put it in the data extraction table. This is what you see here. So let's suppose I'm interested in results, right? So you see that as soon as I clicked on result, it has extracted the key results from those papers and put it in this table. So this is something that we used to do manually when there were no uh, pervasive use of AI tools at times when I was doing those literature reviews. Then let's suppose I'm interested in some other data, methodologies that they have used. You see, within one click, I could extract the methods that these papers have used, these 120 papers have used to conduct this research. And similarly, I can extract data about the data sets that they have used, what are the, for example, the key conclusions that have been drawn from those studies, and so on and so forth. So I do not necessarily need to read every paper from A to Z. I can only extract data of my interest, and then I can analyze the data to report findings for my literature review. Now, once you have identified the papers, you have extracted data from the papers, and then you want to write a draft for your literature review. And certainly after that, you would have to refine it. But if you are interested in writing a first draft through SciSpace, so definitely it can help you. So let's have a look how it works. So it says that create a literature review based on seed papers and so on and so forth. So you see, this is a draft that you can take it as a starting point, and looking at your extracted data, then you can fill it further and bring in your own insights into this particular literature review. Okay, now once you have identified the papers, you have extracted data from the papers, you have written your literature review. Now, what comes next? What comes next is that you have to do paraphrasing, particularly if you're not a native English speaker. In that case, it becomes more relevant to paraphrase and to smoothen your writing so that it is more easier for readers to read and understand your work. So let's have a look how this works. So there is this extension, you can add it. You can put your text here and make it formal, creative, fluent, academic, whatever tone you want to give your writing. This is just showing you the options, that the things that you can do when you have your paper already written. And then you can also generate citations. So, for example, if you have a paper and you want to cite it in a particular style like APA, Chicago, IEEE, and so on and so forth, so SciSpace can format the citation in the right way for you. So here, this is another demo of how you can generate citations for your literature review. Let's have a look how this works. So you enter the title of your paper. This is my paper that I showed. I entered the title of that paper. And I want to cite it in the APA style. So this is, it has created the citation for me. Now, going back to the steps, you have identified the papers, extracted data from papers, wrote your literature review, paraphrased, and included all the relevant citations. Then the next step is to see whether there is any plagiarism or there is no plagiarism. So SciSpace can also help you to determine how much percent of your content is plagiarized and how you can reduce that plagiarism. So let's have a look how this particular feature works. So you have uploaded your paper and then you have written a prompt to check plagiarism in your paper. So it has generated this report. So you can see the summary that, for example, how much percent of it is of low similarity, high similarity, and so on and so forth. Overall similarity score is 10 to 15%. Now, different journals have different standards. It also varies from the feed, that how much percentage is acceptable. So, for instance, in some the domain in which I work, around 20% of the plagiarism is somewhat acceptable, because it is not possible to have 0% plagiarism. Sometimes you use the name of a particular data set or a particular algorithm, those kind of things, so that definitely would be plagiarized with some other paper, but because those are names, so you cannot change those names. The problem in plagiarism comes when you take something verbatim from a different source. Like, for example, if I take a sentence from another paper and I put it in my paper, and I did not put it in inverted commas, or I did not put a reference there, in that case it would be flagged. It happened to me personally as a early at the start of my PhD. I did the same mistake. I submitted a paper to one of a very decent journal. They disc rejected my paper, and then the editor clearly identified that you have copied this sentence from this source. So at that time when it happened, I was it was around 40-page paper, and there was one sentence that was plagiarized. And obviously, it was my mistake to take a sentence from another source and put it in my paper. But that was very, my supervisor was very unhappy with me, and definitely it didn't leave a good mark for me in that journal. But at a, at the stage where you're doing PhD, maybe such mistakes are somewhat, okay. But as a more seasoned researcher, obviously you need to be more careful not to take something and claim it at your own. Now, the next thing is that once you, so let's suppose there is plagiarism in your paper and you want to remove that plagiarism. right? So what we can do in that case, you can also humanize your content to reduce the level of plagiarism. So let's have a look how it works. We go to AI detector. We put we say analyze. It says it's 100% AI written. Then we say paraphrase, and that has changed it. So these are the key changes that have been made, and that would help reduce the plagiarized content. Now, one thing is very important when it comes to plagiarism, in particularly AI plagiarism, which means that something is written by AI or non-AI or by human. The tools that we have, they are not entirely accurate. It happened multiple times to me that I would take something that I have written, let's suppose 10 years ago, and I put it and then they say, okay, it's AI written. There was no AI written thing at that time. So it is, the results are not always very accurate, but again, you need to be careful and you need to have justifications. For example, if you submit to a journal, they flag it as AI written. In that case, you need to have some justification is to establish that this is not AI written or there is not AI plagiarized content in your manuscript. Now, in addition to what we have seen, there are some new features that been added very recently in SciSpace, and we can have a look and then we can discuss that how those features can help you in your literature reviews. Let's have a look.
Whether you're drowning in tabs, stuck behind paywalls, juggling PDFs from Drive, or just tired of fixing citations, these new upgrades can streamline your entire research workflow. First up, unify re-ranked sources. When you run a query in literature review on Agent, you now get a single unified paper table. SciSpace pulls top papers from Google Scholar, PubMed, SciSpace, and more, then merges and re-ranks them with relevance scores, tags, and reasoning, so you can focus on the most important papers first. Next up, University Library Access. Now you access paywalled papers instantly through your institution using LibKey without ever leaving SciSpace. Just click and open the full text. Then, 3 times faster data extraction. While the agent is running, you can now add or remove columns, filter results, analyze papers, and even pause or resume activity. After that, connectors. You can now connect Google Drive to the agent for seamless file access. And soon, you'll also be able to connect OneDrive, Zotero, Mendeley, PowerPoint, and more. And finally, improved citations. Now, you can cite directly from the paper table. And for uploaded PDFs, see the exact snippet the model used and jump straight to it inside the PDF, making citations faster and more transparent. All these upgrades are now live in SciSpace. Try them.
So you have seen here that some of them we have discussed that you can, for example, have takes to the papers about the relevance, how relevant it is, moderately relevant, and so on and so forth. So that way you can select only the papers that are directly or fully relevant to your literature review. Then you can also, as I mentioned, that you can immediately access the PDF of papers within the SciSpace platform. Next, what you can do is that you can extract data from those papers within the blink of an eye using SciSpace. And then also, it was mentioned, as you would have seen, that you can cite very easily. Let's suppose you in the platform you see a paper relevant, you can immediately cite the paper. So these are some of the new additions in SciSpace that are directly somewhat designed for to help you in your literature reviews.
Out today.
Now, to summarize that, how you can sort of supercharge your literature reviews with AI tool like, for example, SciSpace. Some of the things that you can do with the help of AI are these. For example, you can search for relevant research papers. You can extract data from those papers. You can chat with the papers to extract more details because there is as I showed you, there is a feature called Chat PDF. So you can immediately talk to the paper. generate summaries of the research papers. You can prepare the outline for your research paper. You can also have you can write very faster with the suggestions from SciSpace that I showed you, that you can it can help you a lot in writing as well. You can cite from around 20 million plus papers that they have in their database. You can search in aid counter arguments to your paper, edit your paper. You can paraphrase sentences, you can proofread your entire paper, you can check plagiarism, and lastly, you can humanize AI written content. And this is a coupon code SLR45. If you use this one, so this will get you around 45% discount on annual plans for SciSpace. Now, we come to the third part of this um, webinar. So the first part was we introduced what are literature reviews. Then the second one was I talked about my own literature review that I did through very traditional methods. Then the third part, I talked about the different features of SciSpace and how they can help you to do literature reviews more efficiently. Now, the fourth part is that where is research going, right? So here, these are some of my understanding and insights. So I believe that in future research is gonna be more faster and better. With the help of these AI tools, we can do things quickly, and that eventually will leave us with more time where we can do better research. The use of tools will increase. I can tell you from my own experience, every other day I see some new tool being introduced, and that is addressing a particular niche. Like, for example, I believe that making diagrams, making posters, making slides, all of those things would be automated. Particularly anything that is repetitive in nature within the research domain, that will be taken and that will be done automatically through AI tools. Now, I believe that people or researchers who have tools literacy, they will win, right? I am not an advocate of using AI tools when it comes to creativity, critical analysis, those sort of things should come from us as research. But things that could be done better by AI, that should be left to AI. The fourth point is that I believe that AI, it supports, but it should not replace us. Someone who thinks that as a researcher they don't have to do anything and everything will be done by AI, that's not the right approach. Then, as a researcher, we need to be mindful of biases and limitations. So, for example, the answers from an AI, uh, it it might not always be relevant. Like, for example, if there is an AI tool that is trained on data from US, but we ask the question that, like, for example, that's trained on uh, on data from US, and we ask a question that, for example, what is the most favorite drink in US? So maybe it says coffee. But if we ask the same question from that particular AI, that what is the most favorite drink, let's suppose in India, it might not be coffee, it might be tea or something else. So context is important, and then through that, the AI model can be biased. Then we need to be aware of plagiarism. I think that now, when there are so many AI tools and people are using AI tools, we need to be more aware of how we make sure that we do not violate any academic integrity or ethical boundaries. The seventh point is that you also need to be more careful about this in the protection and security of your sensitive information. So when you are uploading something to a platform, you need to first read their data safety and data security policies and be sure that your data will not lane into some adversary hands. Now, having said that, what is it that as researchers we can do to adapt to these conditions, to adapt to this new way of doing research? What we can do is we can learn about prompt engineering, which means that how we can get the best output from these AI tools. We need to be more literate about AI tools. We need to know what are my ethical and integrity boundaries. And we need to understand about workflow automation, which means that we need to constantly reflect, is there something in my workflow that is something that I can automate so that I can free up that time and put it in more creative activities? And lastly, the creative critical evaluation of AI outputs. So when I get an output from AI, I need to have that eye to check, is it correct or is it not correct. We do not need to trust it blindly.